Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Inside Number 9, Season 4. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins inside a hotel where the bellboy drags luggage to the 9th floor. He addresses the camera with a rhymed introduction, revealing the essence of the story within his words. Next, two sharply dressed men appear. It's the prince and Henry. Henry reveals he promised the king to ensure the prince's safety, as enemies are determined to take his life. The prince resides in room 911 and generously tips the bellboy 50. Henry is in the opposite room, 912, and delivers a foreboding monologue saying that the prince won't survive the night. An assassin is out to sever the royal bloodline, leaving the old king heartbroken and unhinged. His father will ascend the throne and the prince's crown will rest upon his head. Just then, the prince calls out to the bellboy, wishing to order some off-menu services. The bellboy quickly accommodates him, and the prince splits the 50 tip in half, promising to settle the balance once the task is complete. The bellboy accepts the assignment, excitement barely contained. Then, an elderly lady emerges from room 918, knocking on the door of room 915. She seems confused, telling the man inside that there's a stranger in her room but can't recall her room number. At that moment, her son steps out to explain that his mother fell and hit her head, causing memory issues. He gently takes her back to room 918. Meanwhile, a couple appears. The woman, Miss Amber, complains about wearing high heels while juggling so many things, and her boyfriend, Gus, seems oblivious to her struggles. Gus fiddles with the door card, which is malfunctioning, and decides to head to the front desk, leaving Amber alone in the corridor, feeling forlorn. After Miss Amber's monologue, the maid enters and spots her alone in the corridor. She approaches with enthusiasm, asking if Amber needs any help. Noticing that Amber is upset with her boyfriend for having to replace a faulty room key, the maid offers some comforting words. From their conversation, we learn that the maid's boyfriend is none other than the bellboy. Upon hearing about the key card issue, the maid reveals she has a universal key and offers to help Amber open her door. Suddenly, Amber asks if there are any available rooms. When she finds out that room 913 is vacant, she decides to book it for herself. As the maid passes room 911, the prince emerges and expresses his distaste for the number. The maid promptly takes him to the recently vacated room 914. The maid continues past room 915, where Mr. Green answers the door, requesting a stopper for his bathtub. After she agrees, he begins his own monologue. He wants to block the water from draining because he plans to end his life in the tub. He had twins, abandoned at birth, and their mother died in childbirth while he rotted in prison. One stayed in England, the other sent abroad, and now he doesn't even know how they're faring. So tonight, he will find his peace here. Meanwhile, Gus returns with the room key, but he doesn't see Amber. He tries the key, but it still won't work. At that moment, the bellboy returns to the 9th floor, swiping the key for room 917, ready to meet his girlfriend, the maid, for a rendezvous. Since the key was always malfunctioning, he leaves the door ajar. He notices Gus repeatedly attempting to open his door and mistakenly assumes he's the guest from room 911 who ordered special services. Of course, the bellboy has no idea that the guest from 911 has gone to room 914, so he cheerfully informs Gus that he's actually in the wrong room. He should be in 911. Gus had also ordered some special services, but they're not on the same page. Realizing that the bellboy is waiting for a tip, Gus confesses his proposal plan. He ordered an apple pie to be delivered to the room, hiding the ring inside. Just as he finishes explaining, the confused elderly lady from room 918 rushes out again, this time knocking on the prince's door. The prince assumes his special service has arrived and, surprisingly adaptable, invites the elderly lady inside. At that moment, Miss Amber exits her room, and mistaking the prince for Gus, she angrily slaps him. Meanwhile, Henry, from room 912, steps out, launching into his own conflicted monologue, saying that he can't hide in the shadows anymore. He must kill the prince. If he doesn't want to be suspected, he needs an alibi. He just saw a hypnotist downstairs. His act was quite interesting. Or perhaps he could pretend to be the hero who saved the prince. Next, the elevator arrives on the 9th floor, and the prince's real special service shows up. Henry, noticing the woman's sexy and red attire, immediately realizes that the prince ordered something special. We'll call this lady Miss Red. With his earlier worries fading, Henry devises a perfect plan. He tells her he's a security consultant, promising her triple the fee if she'll add a sedative to the red wine and have his master drink it after her service tonight. This way, his master will be well rested for an important meeting tomorrow. Seeing the potential payday, Miss Red eagerly accepts the task. Henry knocked on the door of room 911, and Gus assumed it was the service he'd ordered, letting Miss Red inside. Henry then returned to room 912. Meanwhile, the son of the elderly lady from room 918, fresh from a shower, realized his mother was missing again and started searching for her. He knocked on Mr. Green's door in room 915, only to hear Mr. Green says that he's busy trying to hang himself. It seemed the stopper still hadn't arrived, and the old man had changed his method, preparing to take his life. In the elevator, the maid and the hypnotist arrived on the 9th floor. The maid remarked on how spectacular the hypnotist's performance had been, especially when he called out tomato meat sauce spaghetti, making everyone sway involuntarily. The hypnotist, who lived in room 916, ordered a glass of red wine before entering. The maid then asked for his help with a small task. She explained that the apple pie on the cart was ordered by Miss Amber's boyfriend in room 913, where a ring was hidden inside for a proposal. However, it seemed there was a little rift between the couple, and she hoped the hypnotist could use his persuasive skills to help them out. He agreed enthusiastically, and the maid led him to the door of room 913. Just then, the elderly lady emerged happily from the prince's room 914 with her payment. Mistaking the open door of room 917 for her own, she walked right in. At that moment, Gus, startled by the prince's special service, rushed out of his room. The woman with the wine was eager to finish her task, but the man resisted. The bellboy arrived to inquire about the situation, and Gus felt aggrieved. Having already faced humiliation, he couldn't believe he also had to pay for the service. At that point, Mr. Green, who was preparing to hang himself, could no longer tolerate the commotion in the corridor. The bellboy reassured Miss Red and handed her an apple pie from the cart, then temporarily placed her in room 917, where the elderly lady just walked in. Meanwhile, the hypnotist completed his ritual, explaining that all he needed to do next was bring the woman's boyfriend before her, and upon seeing him, she would fall in love all over again. Holding the glass of red wine from the cart, he entered the room, while the maid went to find Amber's boyfriend in room 914. The maid intended to bring him to see Amber, but was unexpectedly pulled into the room by the prince to help change the sheets. After calming Miss Red, the bellboy and she entered room 917, where the elderly lady had mistakenly wandered in. The bellboy then escorted the old woman back to her room 918. The man searching for his mother returned to the 9th floor after scouring the entire building without finding her. He randomly knocked on a door, hoping to ask if anyone had seen an elderly woman. As luck would have it, he knocked on the door of room 913, where Miss Amber had just been hypnotized. At that moment, whoever she first saw, she would fall for. Just then, the maid appeared with what she believed was Amber's boyfriend, and upon seeing the scene before her, she realized something was amiss. Amber had seen a stranger first. The maid urged the man to explain himself to his girlfriend, while the prince watched on, completely unfazed. At this point, Miss Red couldn't wait any longer to reclaim her service fee. She mistook the prince for the recently served guest from room 911. As they argued, the man suddenly saw his mother push the crazy woman aside and hand the bellboy the 50 she had just earned. The son asked his mother where the money had come from, and she replied it was from the prince. Upon hearing that, Miss Red rushed over to snatch the money, throwing everything into chaos. Realizing they needed help, they decided to consult the hypnotist. Seeing the confusion around them, the prince knocked on Henry's door and ducked into room 912. Gus, in room 911, opened his door to find his girlfriend in the hallway. Miss Amber was furious, saying she just saw him alone with that old lady. Gus, planning to propose, presented the apple pie to her. Unfortunately, it had already been devoured by Miss Red. Gus asked about the hidden diamond ring, and a fight broke out between Miss Amber and Miss Red, who slapped the old lady down. The bellboy intervened and pushed Miss Red into room 917 to calm down, but she unexpectedly tripped again, and after her fall, the elderly lady suddenly regained her senses. Meanwhile, the hypnotist, who had consumed wine laced with sedatives, was almost unconscious. With Miss Amber under his spell, Gus decided to try the most traditional method to break it using true love's kiss. Miraculously, it seemed to work. Just then, the prince opened the door to settle his bill. In that instant, everyone finally saw both the prince and Gus together. The elderly lady's scream brought Mr. Green into the scene, equally shocked by the sight of the two men, who turned out to be Mr. Green's long missing twin sons. But was this the happy ending? Not at all. The villain Henry had taken Mr. Green hostage and demanded to know which man was the prince. In a crucial moment, the hypnotist woke up shouting his catchphrase, which made Henry start dancing in TikTok style. At that moment, it seemed they had finally achieved a perfect ending, but there was still that missing engagement ring. Just then, Miss Red found the ring after a frantic search and handed it to Gus, concluding the performance. The second story begins in the rehearsal room, where a sharply dressed man pulled a few yellowed scripts from a wicker prop box, savoring their contents. Just then, the door chimed, catching his attention. A man appeared, dragging a worn suitcase behind him. It turned out they were old acquaintances. The sharply dressed man was Tommy, while the somewhat disheveled one was Ryan. Ryan brought with him 2 large bags of props, saying that just like before, he had prepared a host of new and exciting items to inspire their creative juices. Hearing this, Tommy felt the need to explain that since his mother passed away, he had no place to store things and had to discard some props. Though it was a sad reality, Ryan tried to cover it up with humor. Noticing Tommy's lack of amusement, Ryan awkwardly admitted he was rambling. After 30 years, Tommy felt a profound distance from his former friend and partner. He rejected Ryan's enthusiastic greeting, suggesting they jump straight into rehearsals. As they prepared, Ryan chattered on about their past performances. Tommy cut him off, urging him to get to the point and warning him not to pull faces at the audience while he was delivering the punchlines. The performance began. Even after all these years, Ryan remembered every line and movement from their hilarious imitation act. Tommy suggested changing the story's ending, explaining that in today's society, imitating accents from other races could be seen as discriminatory. Ryan proposed several new sketches, but Tommy dismissed them as outdated. Feeling frustrated, Tommy stood up, ready to leave, believing the idea of reuniting to perform was ridiculous. Ryan began to sing an old song, and the familiar melody caused Tommy to pause. He then opened up about his life, mentioning he now lived in France running an e-commerce company called Angry Tomato, which had 15 studios worldwide and employed 100 people. He had long since moved on from their comedy career. Tommy, with a hint of pride, added that he had even had their performance videos removed from YouTube, claiming they no longer fit his image and would only bring him embarrassment. Upon hearing this, Ryan fell silent for a moment before changing the subject and offering to make tea for his old partner. Tommy reminisced about their debut in the 80s, recalling how they had little talent and had only managed to get a season of short sketches on TV by sheer luck as variety shows began to decline. Ryan disagreed, believing that their hard work had paved the way for those opportunities. When Ryan asked why Tommy had come back, he flippantly replied, because Ryan still owes him 25. Ryan seemed unaware of what he was referring to and lost in thought, walked over to a chair and spontaneously began to perform a monologue. Watching his old friend dodge questions with absurd performances, Tommy remained unruffled, stating he was funny enough on his own and didn't need him. But Ryan argued that cheese and crackers were a perfect pair, inseparable. When he brought up their old duo name, Cheese and Crackers, Tommy grew irate, finding the name both foolish and juvenile. Ryan proposed putting their names on the poster as Ryan and Tommy, which only infuriated Tommy further, wondering why his name always had to come second. Regardless, the fact that they could perform together again should have been enough. Yet Tommy didn't feel satisfied. Ryan continued to dream aloud about his plans to audition for Britain's Got Talent. Tommy was incredulous, asking why he thought he would join him on the show. Ryan recounted a previous occasion when they had missed out on a chance to appear together because the producers wouldn't allow it. The two argued back and forth until Tommy revealed he had returned for one last show because Ryan's daughter had written to him. Tommy hesitated but softened his tone, acknowledging that he knew Ryan had been struggling in recent years, but he changed the topic abruptly. Ryan was getting ready to rehearse the next sketch when he ducked into a box. However, both men, now past their prime, one unable to lift a finger and the other with a bad knee, had to simplify the act. Ryan performed a puppet show with outdated jokes, even trying to spray the audience for laughs. Tommy could take it no longer. Perhaps it was a painful reminder, but Ryan blurted out, saying he had lost the spark of passion. He was as cold as a shark. That's why the performance always falls flat and the audience can feel it. He added that he had stifled Cheese and Cracker. Tommy seemed to have anticipated this, showing no anger or rebuttal. With nothing left to say, Ryan decided to step out for a moment to cool off. Just 2 minutes later, he returned to the rehearsal room claiming it was raining outside. What Tommy had seen in Ryan's suitcase made him realize his old friend was now homeless. He pressed Ryan for an explanation, who became awkward and embarrassed. Under Tommy's relentless questioning, Ryan confessed his situation. Tommy reproached him for not reaching out. Ryan replied that he didn't want his money, he just wanted him to be here, to perform one last time as cheese and crackers. At that moment, Tommy put aside the indifference he had shown since they first met. He suggested their act needed to be more modern, but it was clear Ryan couldn't keep up with the times. Ryan felt their performance should honor tradition, while Tommy believed it should be more commercial. Tommy hesitated, bringing up Bernick Clifton's dressing room again, but Ryan seemed to have no recollection. What had happened in Bernick Clifton's dressing room 30 years ago? Tommy didn't pursue the topic, instead suggesting they rehearse their next act, Brown Bottle. They set up the props and began the performance. After the rehearsal, Ryan basked in the glory of a perfect show, while Tommy finally voiced the thoughts he had bottled up for 30 years. On that fateful day, they had been performing the Brown Bottle sketch, and when it was Ryan's turn to go off stage to get the broom, he never returned, leaving Tommy to struggle alone while the audience mocked him, asking where the funnier guy had gone. After the show, Tommy searched everywhere and finally found Ryan in Bernick Clifton's dressing room, completely wasted, nearly choking on his own vomit. Ryan's alcoholism had spiraled out of control, and that dressing room had been the last straw. Tommy shouted in frustration that he had paid Ryan the $25 for the damage done to the props by the makeup artist, but Ryan had never reimbursed him. Ryan defended himself, saying he was under immense pressure, performing every day, and that during the Brown Bottle show, he had to drink 7 bottles in 3 minutes. Tommy, nearly in tears, questioned why Ryan had been barred from many shows, and even when he did perform, the results were abysmal because he was always drunk. Tommy feared that if they became more successful, Ryan would become even harder to control. Sooner or later, he might lose his life. Despite his love for the stage, Tommy chose to walk away. Just then, the door opened, and Ryan's daughter entered. At that moment, in the rehearsal room, only Tommy remained, aside from the woman. As Tommy had previously mentioned, he returned because Ryan's daughter had invited him to perform, but the unspoken part was that it was at her father's funeral. Before leaving, the woman handed Tommy a letter from her father, containing $25 and an apology note. It turned out Ryan had never forgotten. He knew everything. Finally, Tommy imagined singing a farewell duet with his old friend. Thus, the story concludes. Many of Ryan's words reflected Tommy's true feelings. At one point, Ryan mentioned that Tommy had appeared on a variety show without inviting him. Tommy claimed it was simply because the show invited only one person, but it was really because of Ryan's alcoholism. In his imagination, Tommy had Ryan articulate this, revealing the guilt he had carried within him. Perhaps he had often wondered if their fortunes would have turned had Ryan been given that opportunity. When Ryan scolded Tommy for being as cold as a shark, he was indirectly expressing Tommy's own long-held thoughts. For 30 years, he had never let go. Deep down, he believed Ryan was the one with true comedic talent. Although Tommy imagined rebutting Ryan, blaming their failed career on his drinking, he also recognized that he had been indifferent back then. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to voice those thoughts through an imagined Ryan. Tommy was a contradiction. He harbored unresolved feelings. He resented that Ryan was more popular and always stole the spotlight, yet he sacrificed his own passion for his partner's life. He didn't want Ryan to die from alcohol, but stubbornly refused to bring it up. On this visit, he tentatively asked Ryan if he remembered Bernick Clifton's dressing room. It was Tommy's way of asking himself if Ryan knew everything. He struggled with anger and frustration, feeling that things were unresolved and that Ryan had left quietly. He never imagined that Ryan remembered everything all along. The letter he left behind, Tommy guessed Ryan had wanted to send it countless times but never found the courage, knowing how precious his partner's sacrifice had been. The guilt was a burden he couldn't face regarding his old friend. As he prepared to leave, he asked his daughter to deliver the letter, using his funeral as the final stage for Tommy to perform one last time with him. Ultimately, amidst the music that brought tears of joy, they said their formal goodbyes. The third story begins with a moving truck slowly pulled into Villa number 9. The movers knocked on the door, greeted by a visibly anxious woman. Before she could say much, the worker slipped inside. Chatty and distracted, the mover packed up the belongings while trying to engage the woman in conversation, but she seemed off, her emotions fraying. The worker assumed she was just stressed about the move. Suddenly, a flamboyantly dressed man in a fuchsia nightgown and heat-resistant gloves appeared. The woman explained that this was her husband's peculiar attire, and the couple who looked like strangers raised no suspicions with the mover. Seeing the worker still packing, the husband quickly made an excuse that they had somewhere to be, subtly urging him to leave. The worker, however, insisted they were sticking to the schedule. Growing wary of the couple's urgency, he sensed something was off. Just then, an elderly man stumbled down the stairs, complaining of stomach pain. The flamboyant blonde man called out to him, urging him to return to bed. The old man, somewhat confused, shouted for the mover to get out. The woman explained that the old man believed himself a great musician, leaving the worker completely bewildered. Before he could react, the old man began to cough up blood. Panicking, the mover rushed to the bathroom for a towel, but when he opened the door, he found another corpse. As he stumbled back, he knocked over a rug at the entrance, revealing yet another body beneath it. The husband approached the mover, looking like he was about to silence him for good, but before he could act, the woman stabbed him first. How did it all unfold? Let's rewind 10 minutes. The blonde man had been adding rat poison to hot cocoa, his outfit less extravagant at that moment. He entered the old man's room to feed him the poison, but the old man mistook him for his brother and began to ramble about his music career. After a while, the old man confused the man for his son, recalling that he had a daughter. As they chatted, the old man drank down the poisoned hot cocoa. Downstairs, there was some noise, and the man, wearing only his underwear, quickly grabbed a fuchsia nightgown and headed down. He encountered a woman, realizing they were not a couple. Her name was May, and she was a neighbor looking for the old man's daughter, Natasha. The man said Natasha had gone to pick up the movers, glancing instinctively at the carpet, where a woman's body was likely rolled up, presumably Natasha's. May mentioned that Natasha often spoke of a mysterious man, presumably referring to him. Their awkward exchange suggested things weren't quite as they seemed. Just then, the old man upstairs started shouting, prompting the man to rush up to check on him as the rat poison took effect. Meanwhile, he noticed May rummaging through some things and finding a recording pen. In a flash of panic, he threatened May, demanding she follow his orders, aligning with the earlier scene. Now let's rewind 10 more minutes. The well-dressed real estate agent arrived, apologizing for being late. At that moment, the blonde man was dressed normally and was covering the sofa with a throw. The agent had received a message from the homeowner, Natasha, and mistook the man for a potential buyer, starting to give a tour of the house. When he noticed stains on the wall, he thought it was just the owner preparing to repaint for sale and eagerly pointed it out. Sensing the blonde man's lack of interest, the agent resorted to clumsy sales tactics, pretending to take a call while speaking loudly enough for him to hear. He claimed someone had already made an offer on the house, but just as he was saying this, his phone rang. It was the man's mother asking what he wanted for dinner. Fearing he might lose the client, he quickly hung up. The blonde man feigned the need to think it over, prompting the agent to plead and act pitifully. Reluctantly, the blonde agreed to buy the house, leaving the agent overjoyed and promising to include all the furniture. As he lifted the white sheet off the sofa, the body of the homeowner, Natasha, was revealed, shot dead. Realizing he'd been exposed, the blonde man drew his gun to silence the agent. After several missed shots, the cunning agent tripped him, and during the struggle, the gun jammed. The agent took the opportunity to flee to the bathroom. The blonde man then noticed a piece of a doormat visible under the door. With a quick motion, he yanked it, only to hear a crash as the agent fell and hit his head on the sink, dead. He dragged the body to the toilet and locked the bathroom door. Discovering he was covered in blood, he stripped off his clothes and then wrapped Natasha's body in the carpet. Suddenly, he heard a noise from upstairs, and panic set in, wondering who else could be there. We know Natasha's old father upstairs was still confused, and fortunately, he mistook the blonde man for his brother. The screen went black, and we rewind another 10 minutes to find Natasha alive, helping her father into the bathtub. She planned to continue packing for their move. The old man, dazed, couldn't recognize her as his daughter. Feeling guilty, Natasha informed him that she and Charles were relocating to Portugal, implying they had found a cozy home for him, likely a retirement home. She mentioned that she wouldn't be able to stay in touch once she was gone and that her disappearance would be for the best. The old man, oblivious, paid no heed to her words, and Natasha left, feeling a bit lonely. Next, she called the real estate agent to leave a message, mentioning that a buyer was interested in the house and would get priority if they arrived first. She placed the fuchsia nightgown at the door, finally reminding the agent to explain to any guests that her old father, believing he was a great musician, shouldn't be misinterpreted. At that moment, the blonde man stealthily entered the house. As a hitman, he was surveying the area when he casually placed his gun next to the stove and lifted the sofa cover. Just then, he turned and bumped into Natasha coming down the stairs. Mistaking him for a mover, she politely helped him hang up his coat and offered to make him a cup of tea. Spotting the gun by the stove, the hitman quickly engaged her in small talk to divert her attention, confirming that she was indeed the homeowner. They chatted about the move. Unbeknownst to him, the stove was still on, and he burned himself while the gun fell into a bucket of water. Natasha, ever helpful, went to fetch him some ointment. After wrapping his wound, the hitman decisively retrieved the gun from the bucket. A shot rang out, striking Natasha in the forehead, and she collapsed onto the sofa, greasy blood splattering against the wall. The hitman, increasingly frantic, began to clean up the mess. Spotting some painting supplies nearby, he started painting over the bloodstains. Just then, the real estate agent arrived, prompting the hitman to quickly cover the sofa with a throw, neatly tying into the earlier scene. Now let's rewind 10 minutes to the very beginning. Natasha was mopping the floor, trying to get rid of a stain by the bathroom door. Frustrated, she pulled up part of the doormat to cover the spot. We already know that this very doormat would lead to the death of the real estate agent. The doorbell rang. It was neighbor May, who burst in, tearfully distraught. She told Natasha that her husband, Charles, had been unfaithful, handing her a note that tied back to the earlier events. Earlier, Natasha had mentioned to her father that she and Charles were moving to Portugal, which suggests that May's husband was involved with Natasha. The note read that she knows about our affair. Natasha casually remarked that the handwriting didn't look like Charles's. When May asked how she could tell, Natasha brushed it off. She comforted May, advising her not to overthink things, and urged her to head home to wait for a delivery. Upstairs, her father began shouting again, and Natasha went to help him bathe. However, May lingered in the living room, pulling out a recorder. It became clear that she had deliberately led Natasha to talk about Charles. She then called her husband using the landline and recorded their conversation. May intended to confirm whether Charles was cheating with Natasha, but was shocked to learn that the blonde man was actually sent by Charles to eliminate May. Natasha had arranged for the real estate agent to bring potential buyers to the house at this time to create an alibi for herself after the incident, which is why she had urged May to go home quickly. She didn't want her to miss the hitman. But how did the hitman end up at Natasha's place? As May considered her options, she grabbed a screwdriver and left, forgetting the recorder behind, which later explained her return to search for it. At the door, she changed the house number from 6 to 9, which clarified why the hitman had arrived at the wrong address. And that's how the story comes to an end. In this story, Natasha had an affair with May's husband, Charles, and the two planned to eliminate May so they could escape together. Unbeknownst to them, May discovered their scheme, leading her to change the house number and direct the hitman to her home. The hitman, however, was careless, failing to confirm his target and resulting in multiple murders to cover his tracks while ultimately failing to save his own life. Lastly, there's an intriguing point. Many believe there's an underlying evil twist. Charles and Natasha might actually be the old man's children. From his comments, we learn he has a son and a daughter, and he wishes for them to care for each other. The son is never seen while the daughter is moving to Portugal. Why didn't she bring her brother to look after their father instead of sending him to a nursing home? Before leaving, she tells her father that she and Charles are moving to Portugal, and they'll be on vacation there. This could refer to her and her father, or to her and Charles, perhaps even the three of them together. Natasha's parting words, disappearing would be better for everyone, raises the question. This could imply that after their affair and murders, they could run away together. Alternatively, it could suggest a shameful blood relation that necessitates starting anew in a distant place. Additionally, when May handed Natasha the note, Natasha immediately said it wasn't Charles's handwriting. She explained that she recognized it because she received holiday cards from Charles every year, leading some to think they might be siblings. The fourth story begins with a husband who is alone at home working on a puzzle. He hears the door open and sighs involuntarily. The phone rings, but when he answers, there's no response. He remains focused on his puzzle while his wife appears to be in emotional pain, struggling to steady herself. She tells her husband that she bought the instant noodles he wanted. The husband is a wedding photographer, spending every weekend taking pictures for couples, and he increasingly isolates himself in his work, distancing himself from his wife. Hoping to add some color to their dull life, the wife convinces him to host a party to renew their vows. She eagerly reads her vows to him, but he dismissively comments that they're nice but a bit long. She wants to hear what he wrote, fearing she might cry and ruin her 200 makeup on the day if she hears it for the first time then. Her excitement quickly fades when she discovers that he copied a heartfelt vow from a dating site, specifically one from a site dedicated to couples. Disappointed, she notes that they don't need to spend a fortune on a party to prove their love. She suggests they could celebrate together in a simpler way, even using a pull tab from a soda can as a ring. He understands her point, but deliberately changes the subject. He spends nearly every day downstairs, immersed in editing photos for clients, while completely neglecting their marriage and their intimate life. She finally voices her frustrations, and he promises to consider her feelings. Just then, the phone rings again. She answers, while he angrily presses pieces of the puzzle together. Late that night, the wife wakes up and notices her husband isn't beside her. She gets up to search for him and sees the light on in his studio downstairs. When she enters the basement, she helps him clean up leftover noodles. There, she spots bills on the table. The husband emerges from the bathroom, warning her not to rummage through his things. Their financial situation is dire. They're struggling to pay off loans and have many overdue bills. The husband is restless and feels like a failure, not only because of his meager income, but also due to his health issues. His low sperm quality means they've never had children. He once imagined that if they had a child, a daughter would be named Rachel and a son would be named Levi. The wife comforts him using words only but not her muscles, suggesting they could move to a smaller place if they can't keep up with the loans. She offers to return to her previous job. It turns out she had an affair with a former colleague. She complains that he spends every weekend pretending to be a happy family with other couples. He explains that it's just a way to engage clients and capture better photos. They circle back to her affair, which, despite being in the past, still haunts him. She sincerely apologizes once more. He then mentions the phone calls he's been receiving lately, calls that hang up quickly, and wonders if it's from her former lover. He shows her the photos he's been developing, revealing he had followed her and discovered she met with her ex. She insists she only saw her former lover because she needs a job now. He refuses to listen, believing her desire to renew their vows is a way to erase her past mistakes. In a fit of anger, he knocks things over, and she tries to comfort him using her muscles. The next day, the wife dresses as a nurse, hoping to rekindle their smelly romance. The husband looks troubled, while she tries various tactics to entice him, but he remains uninterested. He complains that they've outgrown role-playing games, which finally breaks her spirit. Just then, the doorbell rings. A couple arrives to collect their photos, and the wife becomes even angrier, convinced her husband arranged for guests to avoid being alone with her. To vent her frustrations, she tells the guests she works in a morgue, dealing with lifeless bodies. She uses this to provoke her husband. Upon hearing that the newlyweds plan to hold their wedding in a church, she doesn't hold back, openly lamenting that her own wedding was dreadfully boring, just a simple paperwork affair with nothing special. Seeing this, the husband quickly changes the subject, presenting the photos to the couple. As the wife becomes increasingly inebriated, she remarks that he handles others' weddings expertly, even calling him top-notch. Unable to take it any longer, the husband attempts to push her out the door, leading to an argument in front of the guests. The awkward newlyweds find an excuse to leave early. Upset, the wife storms upstairs. The husband goes to the basement, locks the door, and begins boiling water for noodles. He fumbles around and finds a key stuck in a drawer, moving a filing cabinet aside to reveal a hidden door. In the glaring daylight, a dark truth is uncovered. The noodles weren't his food. They were the only source of sustenance for the woman he had been keeping imprisoned. He slowly closes the iron door behind him. It was the husband's birthday, and the wife, eager to reignite their marriage, planned a surprise for him. She catered to his interests, starting with a puzzle, followed by a special flavor of instant noodles, and culminating in the main event, a trip to Paris. She passionately aimed to save their marriage, reminding him that since he began tirelessly developing photos in the basement 9 years ago, he hadn't taken a vacation, and now it was time for a break. When he asked when they were leaving, she told him it was this afternoon and that she had already booked a taxi. Hearing this, he gritted his teeth. With no preparation in a week, what would happen to the woman he had imprisoned? He made an excuse to find his passport and hurriedly got up. Noticing his worry, she reassured him that everything was arranged. Her parents would come to take care of the house and water the plants, so he didn't need to fret. He dashed to the basement to look for the key. After a brief internal struggle, he made a reckless decision and intentionally threw himself down the stairs, thinking that injuring himself would get him out of the trip and perhaps provide an insurance payout. He didn't anticipate the fall would be serious. Months later, the wife finally completed the last piece of the puzzle she had gifted him. Just then, the doorbell rang. In a moment of panic, she destroyed the finished puzzle. It was the newlywed couple from before, stopping by to thank the photographer and bringing champagne. However, she had some tragic news to share. Her husband had suffered an accident and died 4 months ago after falling down the stairs. After a moment of contemplation, the newlyweds revealed another reason for their visit. They were interested in settling in the area and wanted to know if she would consider selling her house. Once they left, a former cleaning lady returned, offering to help tidy up. The wife insisted she didn't need to do that. Unbeknownst to her, the cleaning lady was the woman who had been imprisoned by her husband for 9 years, living in darkness and surviving on instant noodles. The cleaning lady thanked her for saving her. Just then, a boy walked in. His name was Levi. As shown earlier, the husband had once said that if they had a daughter, he would name her Rachel, and if a son, Levi. The boy carried a bowl of instant noodles as he headed towards the basement. The wife had kept her word and maintained her promise. The boy opened the door, placing the noodles on the ground. From the darkness emerged a monstrous figure still wearing that ring, and thus the story came to an end. The woman had strayed due to her husband's prolonged neglect, but after sincerely repenting, she made multiple attempts to save their marriage. What she didn't realize was that the true reason for her husband's coldness was his twisted desires. In the end, the truth came to light. To some extent, she still upheld her vows, through joy and sorrow, wealth and poverty, loving each other steadfastly until death. Meanwhile, her husband repeatedly disregarded her efforts, treating their marriage as a cover for his perverse appetites. This paints a clear picture of the story, but if we change our perspective, could there be another possibility? The woman mentioned finding her husband's passport in the drawer of the darkroom, indicating that she perhaps uncovered his secret while looking for it. Throughout the story, she was trying to save their marriage, but if she had confronted him directly after discovering his secret, their relationship would have shattered. So the week-long trip to Paris also served as a test, a last desperate attempt by the woman to save her marriage, even though the price of this attempt might be the life of an innocent person trapped in the darkroom. After the woman presented the Paris trip as a gift, she asked her husband when the darkroom was built. He replied that it had been 9 years ago. When she said he should come up for air, we can interpret this both literally and metaphorically, taking it as a hint. The subtext is her urging him to return to the family. Another moment occurs when she mentions having her parents come to look after the house, saying he wouldn't want to come home to find everything dead, which seems to say that this everything also includes the woman imprisoned in the basement. Perhaps she believed that only by eliminating her husband's twisted indulgences could he truly return to their life together. Ultimately, he chose to risk his life by throwing himself down the stairs rather than return to what she considered a normal life. In the end, the woman stopped hoping to save their marriage and instead locked away both her husband and her vows in the darkroom, determined to end it all. The fifth story begins on a day for selecting the best actress. The judging panel consists of 5 industry insiders and 1 ordinary audience member. The chairperson leads the process but does not participate in the voting. Next to him is Clive, a screenwriter with a few notable works in his past, now faded into obscurity. The only non-industry representative on the panel is the audience member, a woman seated beside him. The white-haired old man is Rupert, a washed-up stage actor. A film director of a different skin color is also on the judging panel, and the woman who just entered is the famous actress Paula, whose schedule is quite packed. Finally, the last to arrive is a journalist and television commentator. Once everyone is seated, the judging officially begins. In the first round, they must quickly eliminate 4 candidates from a list of 8. For the first candidate, everyone unanimously says no, and the woman is out. The second candidate seems acceptable to the screenwriter, but the film director disagrees, prompting the screenwriter to change his mind. The journalist also chimes in, saying it's not her turn yet. Without hesitation, the woman is eliminated. For the third candidate, there is a strong rejection from the panel. Out she goes. The fourth candidate faces the first opposition from Rupert, while the journalist, who has interviewed the candidate Kelly, argues in her favor, claiming she's smart and ambitious. The director, seemingly having a conflict with the journalist, makes snide remarks. The chairperson intervenes to steer the discussion back on track. The director has no objections to Kelly, and the audience member expresses her admiration for the actress. Overall, Kelly advances to the next round. For the fifth candidate, the first to speak, is the renowned actress Paula, who finds the candidate too young. The director adds that this candidate needs good direction for her lines, prompting the screenwriter to agree. Thus, she is eliminated as well. At this point, out of the 8 candidates, 4 have been discussed and eliminated, leaving 4 who automatically advance. The 4 finalists will now be discussed one by one, followed by anonymous voting, with the chairperson remaining neutral and not voting. The first to discuss is Shauna. The chairperson asks for the audience member's opinion, who praises Shauna as outstanding. The film director concurs, stating she is a dedicated actress, and he would love to work with her if given the chance. The chairperson then asks for the actress's views, and it's clear that one hasn't done her homework, as she's been glued to her notes. Nevertheless, the 3 who have spoken so far are satisfied with Shauna. Next, the journalist expresses that while she found the candidate's film dull, her performance was commendable. Rupert mentions that although he struggled with her diction, he was still moved by her performance. Shauna is receiving broad recognition, and her chances of winning are looking promising. The second candidate is Lady Dorothy. The chairperson asks Rupert to speak first. He mentions that both he and this candidate hail from the Royal Shakespeare Company, so her line delivery is naturally good, but they only know each other in passing. The journalist chimes in, revealing that Rupert and this candidate had a story together decades ago. To ensure fairness, the chairperson suggests that Rupert abstain from voting on this candidate. Next, it's Paula's turn to voice her opinion. Unfortunately, she reads from her notes, which happen to be the journalist's comments published in the paper, awkwardly bumping into the original source. The film director then states that this candidate can be considered a national treasure, but the current script is dragging her down. As expected, the screenwriter immediately agrees. It's worth noting that the screenwriter has submitted a script to this director, so he has been trying to please him for a while. Now it's the audience member's turn, who expresses her fondness for this candidate, saying she reminds her of her grandmother. However, the chairperson counters that the candidate's character is both cruel and bad-tempered. The audience member insists that she wouldn't behave that way in real life, causing a slight awkwardness. The journalist adds that this candidate's temperament in real life isn't great either. In the end, the chairperson summarizes that while Lady Dorothy's acting is solid, everything else is up for debate. Next is the third candidate, Kelly, who made it through the last round. As expected, Paula comments on how difficult it is to choose, claiming that everyone is unique. Paula bluntly points out how painful it is to be forced into competition and then lose, hinting at her own past experiences of feeling powerless, which likely explains her negative attitude toward this selection process. The audience member then steers the discussion back to acting. The film director agrees, acknowledging Kelly's talent but questions whether it's too early for her to be considered for the title of Best Actress at her age. Similar to the previous round, Rupert is not optimistic about this candidate, and the journalist mentions that Kelly's background in soap operas has led her to adopt some bad habits. However, she agrees with the director that given time, Kelly will achieve something significant, though it may still be a bit premature. Unsurprisingly, the screenwriter again mindlessly agrees with the director. In summary, the chairperson places Kelly in the pending category. The final candidate is Anna, the only actress of color in the group. Everyone turns to the film director, waiting for his input. A tense silence fills the room as he questions whether the committee chose him to vote because of his skin color. The chairperson quickly reassures him that a black member is essential on the panel. This comment angers the director even more. Finally, he slams the table and stands up to leave. After some pleading, the director reluctantly sits back down but refuses to speak first. With the director silent, the chairperson calls on the screenwriter. Under the director's scrutinizing gaze, the screenwriter wrestles internally with how to respond. He nervously states that Anna's portrayal is highly credible, then quickly glances at the director for a reaction. Next, the chairperson asks the audience member to weigh in, and she praises Anna's acting, claiming it shows no signs of performance. The chairperson skips over Paula, saying they already know her opinion. The journalist expresses strong support for Anna. Rupert follows, stating that he finds Anna unimpressive, stating her delivery is unclear and her performance stiff and lacking empathy. He calls it a failed casting choice. Finally, it's the film director's turn, and he agrees with Rupert's assessment. In an unexpected twist, the screenwriter abruptly changes his stance. Having just praised Anna, he now claims her performance doesn't meet the mark. Seeing this shift, the journalist questions his integrity, leading to a heated argument between the director and the journalist. It's unclear whether the director genuinely thinks Anna's acting is inadequate, or if he's deliberately opposing the journalist to prove he's not biased by race. Perhaps he's holding a grudge over past negative comments from the journalist. Regardless, the director erupts, calling the journalist a parasite with no contributions. Chaos ensues, prompting the chairperson to call for a 5-minute break to calm everyone down. Rupert apologizes to the film director, saying he meant no offense, and they seem to reconcile. The screenwriter, after some thought, approaches the director and suggests he review the script he sent him, offering to make any changes. The director looks down on this subservience, insisting that the screenwriter should have confidence in his work and defend it. Meanwhile, the audience member notices the journalist, who was just insulted, looking downcast, and comes over to chat. They discuss how the audience member landed this opportunity. The girl expresses envy for the journalist's job and asks if she enjoys it. The journalist recounts many impressive experiences, but grows increasingly melancholic, ultimately nearly agreeing with the director's viewpoint. On the other side, the chairperson presses Paula about whether she has viewed the works of all the candidates in question, as required by the contract. Paula replies that although she doesn't know these individuals personally, she can categorize them at a glance. Ironically, she states that she is an Oscar voter who has selected Best Picture 9 times in the past decade without having seen a single one of those films, so there's no need to worry about her judgment. Eventually, everyone settles down as they prepare to eliminate 2 more candidates. Paula is the first to speak, suggesting they remove the 2 youngest contenders. The film director proposes eliminating Anna to keep the younger girl, Kelly. The audience member expresses her fondness for both, while the journalist suggests they should keep the first candidate, Shauna, since everyone seemed to like her earlier. The chairperson quickly agrees. The screenwriter notes that Shauna won Best Actress last year. Hearing this, Paula, who has never won an award, is stirred and immediately sides with the screenwriter. Rupert also agrees. Now, the screenwriter begins to argue against the director's position, asserting his case. In the end, they hold a vote, with the 4 of them voting to eliminate Shauna, so Shauna is out. Next, the chairperson starts another vote for the last candidate, Anna, revisiting the earlier criticisms of her. Rupert found her unclear in her speech. The director thought she couldn't handle the role, and the screenwriter agreed with the director. Paula, however, seems unconcerned. The vote concludes with a 4 versus 2 against Anna, and she is eliminated. This leaves 2 candidates, the veteran star Lady Dorothy and the young newcomer Kelly. Hands are raised in support of Kelly from the director, screenwriter, and audience member. Meanwhile, Lady Dorothy has the support of the journalist Paula and Rupert, creating a 3-3 tie. Seeing the stalemate, Paula suggests she can switch her vote to end the meeting quickly. However, the director objects. If Paula switches to support Kelly, the director insists he'll change his vote to support the seasoned star, restoring balance. As the director changes his vote, the screenwriter follows suit, backing Lady Dorothy. This frustrates the director, who demands the screenwriter have an opinion of his own. He's already dismissed the screenwriter's terrible script and has no intention of filming it. As the situation escalates and everyone starts changing their votes, the journalist joins in, switching her vote to Kelly, which brings the tally back to 3 versus 3. The journalist reminds the chairperson that Rupert has had an affair with Lady Dorothy, rendering his vote questionable. Ultimately, the responsibility falls to the audience member. Observing the bickering and the careless voting process, she feels disappointed and confused. She expresses her concerns, stating that she didn't realize she had to consider so many factors, like age, past awards, and popularity, none of which seem fair to the actors. In the end, she refrains from voting and leaves the room. After her departure, the chairperson distributes electronic voting devices. After the voting, everyone starts to leave, and the most pressed for time, Paula, rushes out. The journalist tries to get her contact information, but Paula doesn't even slow down. In the end, the journalist stands alone in the corner, feeling isolated. As the director leaves, he calls the team to inform them of the final results. Shauna, who was just eliminated in the top 4, was last year's Best Actress. This gives us a strong hint that, barring any surprises, Kelly will likely take home the Best Actress award this time. Next, Rupert asks who's heading to the bar. The screenwriter volunteers and starts pitching his script to him. Meanwhile, the chairperson wraps up the meeting just as the audience member returns to collect her belongings. The chairperson tells her that she must be pleased with the outcome. They voted thoughtfully, not just with their heads, and part of the reason is her influence. After saying this, the chairperson departs. The audience member begins to remove her makeup, revealing she is actually Kelly herself. With that, the story concludes. It's hard to deny that Kelly's award is well-deserved. How did she maneuver her way to this moment? Let's take a look back. In the initial round of eliminations from 8 to 4, there weren't many challenges. Aside from Rupert's dissatisfaction with Kelly, the rest were fond of her performance. In the round from 4 to 2, Kelly successfully voted out the strongest contender, last year's Best Actress, Shauna. Then, in the final pivotal vote, Lady Dorothy and Kelly ended in a 3-3 tie. The journalist Paula and Rupert supported Lady Dorothy, while the director, the screenwriter, and the audience member backed Kelly. However, when Paula, pressed for time, decided to switch her vote to Kelly to expedite the meeting, this triggered a wave of others changing their votes, causing the situation to spiral out of control. Ultimately, the director switched to support the veteran star, and the screenwriter followed suit. With Paula and the journalist voting for Kelly, the count became a 2-2 tie. It now hinged on the audience member's vote. Ideally, Kelly only needed to vote for herself, but given the chaos in the room and Rupert's constant push for Lady Dorothy to win, the voting had become somewhat superficial. At this moment, seeking an edge and demonstrating her psychological strength, Kelly aimed to influence the voters. From a perspective of the underdog, she spoke to the group, emphasizing that she hadn't considered various external factors, such as age, past awards, and popularity. These aspects were unfair to the actors and shouldn't fall on someone like her to judge. She intentionally addressed everyone, questioning why performance evaluations should involve these external elements. After all, Kelly was younger and lacked the credentials and accolades of Lady Dorothy. Initially, in the rational voting phase, Kelly had the backing of the director and screenwriter. Meanwhile, Shauna, the journalist's earlier favorite, had already been eliminated by the screenwriter. During the break, Kelly, pretending to be an audience member, struck up a conversation with the journalist, making her acutely aware of her isolation in this industry. Among all present, Kelly was the only one who actively engaged with the journalist, significantly increasing the likelihood of swaying the audience member's opinion with her comments. It's clear that a good actress needs to accurately gauge the psychology of her peers. Kelly skillfully tapped into the journalist's mindset, subtly guiding everyone to vote with their hearts rather than relying solely on cold analysis. Ultimately, Kelly was awarded the title of Best Actress. The sixth story begins with 3 individuals responsible for cleaning special locations, specifically tasked with handling the bodies and belongings of the deceased. On this day, they arrived at the home of a man named Frank. As soon as they opened the door, they were taken aback by the scene before them. Frank was a hoarder, and his house was filled to the brim with items, accompanied by the nauseating stench of decaying flesh. Although Frank's body had already been removed, the lingering odor was still overwhelming. The team, led by Keith, needed to clean, organize, and restore the house in preparation for valuing the deceased's estate. Keith and Nick, the bespectacled man, were old partners, while Maz was new to the team. As they pondered where to start, Nick spotted a check. Maz exclaimed in surprise that Frank had won the lottery. How could a millionaire be living amidst such filth? Keith reminded her to respect the dead, but Maz rambled on about how fantastic it would be to have $3.5 million. Annoyed by her chatter, Keith instructed Nick to take Maz to clean the kitchen. Maz complained to Nick about Keith being such a bore, but Nick replied that Keith wasn't a bad guy. He was just struggling. His son had multiple sclerosis and could no longer walk, which added to Keith's stress and short temper. As they tidied up the cabinets, Nick discovered a dead mouse. They carefully wrapped it up and hung it on the door handle to dispose of later. Suddenly, Maz seemed to hear something odd. A mirror caught her attention. In it was a photo of Frank's wife. When she put the photo back, she accidentally activated a hidden door, causing the mirror to swing open and reveal a safe. The two decided to open it. Maz recited a series of numbers. Sure enough, the safe unlocked. It was the birthday of Frank's wife, as shown in the photo. Inside the safe, they found a VHS tape and a package with a label warning them not to open. Ignoring the warning, they opened the package to find a brass rabbit statue. They began searching the house for a TV. The tape was the only thing that could clarify the situation. Soon, Keith found a player, and the video revealed Frank himself. The elderly man spoke about how the contents of that package had ruined countless lives, including his own. Many years ago, he had purchased the brass rabbit at a low price from a monk in India. The monk claimed that the statue could grant the holder 3 wishes, capable of changing one's life. Frank admitted that for a time his life did change until his wife's death. He trailed off and ultimately advised anyone who found the item not to open it, but to send it away and destroy it. Each person has their own fate, and tampering with destiny will lead to dire consequences. With that, the old man stepped off a chair to hang himself. Nick silently set the rabbit down. Keith dismissed it as Frank's inability to cope with the loss of his wife, rambling in his madness. Nick mentioned he held a PhD in folklore. Maz questioned why he chose to be a cleaner, and it turned out that Nick's struggle with alcoholism had led him here. Keith decided to return the rabbit to the safe, and the trio continued their work. But as he passed the door, he heard a rustling sound. The plastic bag containing the dead mouse was moving, with the mouse struggling inside. Maz was sure the mouse had been completely dead when they put it in, while Nick realized that his wish must have taken effect. Without hesitation, Keith stepped forward and killed the mouse. The three of them soon discovered Frank's diary, leading to further revelations. It turned out that Frank's wife had struggled with obesity and was often unhappy, prompting Frank to wish for her to lose weight. 6 months later, she did slim down, but tragically, she also entered the late stages of cancer and passed away shortly after. Keith believed this was merely a coincidence and that they were reading too much into it. However, Nick uncovered another piece of evidence. The diary recorded that just days after purchasing the brass rabbit in India, Frank won the lottery. He then sent his brother on a luxurious vacation to the Florida Keys, only for his brother to die in a boating accident. Nick emphasized that every wish carries unintended consequences, a common theme in folklore. He theorized that upon realizing these repercussions, Frank sold his mansion and retreated to this dilapidated house, gradually giving away his wealth to escape his cursed fate. With no clear direction, Maz was eager to make her own 3 wishes. Keith dismissed her idea as nonsense and returned to his work. Maz suggested wishing for unlimited wishes, a thought many must have had at some point. Keith shouted for them to replace the bloodied floorboards and stop wasting time. At that moment, Keith's phone rang. It was his son asking when he would be home. Meanwhile, Maz continued to dream about her wish. Nick repeatedly warned her to consider Frank's fate. Making wishes could lead to backlash, and greed always comes at a cost. Yet Maz couldn't resist the temptation and made her wish. Hearing the commotion, Keith asked what was going on. They replied it was nothing and continued with the floor. Suddenly, they found a green bag under the floorboards, wondering if Maz's wish had come true so quickly. Opening it revealed only Monopoly game money. Disappointed, Maz was unaware that her wish had already been granted. Keith had just discovered a box filled with pounds in the Monopoly game set. He hesitated for a moment before stuffing the cash into his pocket. Nick caught him in the act, and Keith claimed he was just holding on to it temporarily. When Maz came in and saw the money, she assumed it was her wish coming true and demanded Keith hand it over. Just then, a power outage struck. In the confusion, Maz grabbed the box and ran, while Nick warned her that taking the money would lead to terrible consequences. Keith quickly fixed the fuse, restoring power. Nick urged Maz not to meddle with fate. Just then, a fallen iron triggered a chain reaction. The floorboards they'd pried open with nails lodged into Maz's head, and calamity struck sooner than expected. Keith instructed Nick to head home, saying he would handle things from there. Nick asked if Keith intended to keep the money for himself. Keith admitted they could split it, but Nick wanted nothing to do with it and advised Keith to get rid of the cash. Excited, Keith argued that the money could fund his son's surgery. Nick worried the money was cursed and would bring disaster, but Keith dismissed the idea of magic, attributing it all to coincidence. Suddenly, Nick realized a troubling fact. The videotape was locked in the safe. If Frank had committed suicide, who returned the bag to the safe? Nick began to suspect that Frank was still alive. Keith scoffed at the notion, but when Nick pressed him for proof, Keith swung at him, knocking him down, and said, because he killed Frank. It turned out that Keith had been here before. He had heard rumors that the owner of the house was wealthy, and neighbors had complained about the terrible stench. So he had visited, seeking some financial help, but Frank had no intention of assisting him. During their argument, things escalated and Keith accidentally killed him. Now he set the scene to make it look like Nick had been drunk, kicked the gas line, and prepared to leave with the money. Just then, there was a sound of the door opening, and he followed the noise. Seeing Frank, who had come back from the dead, Keith was stunned. At that moment, he finally understood that Frank's third wish was for eternal life. But now, Frank was filled with regret. His countless suicide attempts to escape this living hell had all been in vain. He was permanently trapped here. Keith laid down the pounds that belonged to Frank, and just then, Nick woke up, calling for Keith. Keith's son had arrived. Nick had used one of his wishes to restore Keith's son's health. Frank was boiling water on the gas stove, and misfortune was about to strike, bringing the story to a close. In this story, it seems that Nick was repaying kindness with kindness. After all, despite his ongoing struggle with alcoholism, Keith was the only one willing to give him a chance, a point that the original film emphasized. Nick had always believed that greedy wishes would backfire, so he thought that selflessly wishing for his friend's child would be exempt from that backlash. But as the old man had warned, life has its own fate, and those who recklessly alter the course of destiny will ultimately face the consequences. However, if the wish was made by Nick, why didn't Keith end up in a better situation? He was neither the direct beneficiary nor the one who made the wish, so it seems that Nick wasn't really repaying kindness. From the beginning, he never dared to make a significant wish, as evidenced by his repeated warnings to Maz. He knew that whoever benefited from the wish would face repercussions. Just like the mouse that came back to life only to be killed again by Keith, he might have intentionally wished for Keith's child to be healthy, ensuring that the beneficiary wouldn't be him. In the end, whether the consequence fell on Keith or the child, it was a form of retaliation against Keith. Unbeknownst to the dazed Keith, he had kicked the gas line and Frank lit the stove to brew tea, leading to the explosion that resulted in their doom. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.